something I feel is very important, although I recognize difficult, is to learn the names of the students in the class. And I think at first to say, how could you possibly learn names when there's 240 people in the classroom? And actually in my classroom is also 6 to 20 students in Bend on a little TV screen. But, so that's just the dynamic of the classroom that I work in. And so clearly by the end of the term, I have not learned every student's name. So I understand that may not be a reasonable expectation. So all I do is try to take every opportunity that I have to learn a student's name to do so. For example, after class, I always have a number of students that stay to ask a question. And so on the first day of class, the very first people who stay and ask a question, I ask their name every single time they ask a question. I'm actually a visual learner, and so if someone just says their name and I haven't worked out the symbols yet, I'm not gonna remember it, and I know that, and so I write it down. So I have my book in front of me, and when they come over and say, hi, can I ask you this question? I answer their question and say, by the way, what's your name? And then I jot it down in my book, and just writing it for me helps to just reinforce. So I'll maybe talk to 5 students after class the first day and get 5 names. And then on my way back to my office, I go through their faces and those names in my head and try to just solidify what were those people's names that I had just met. And then the first time people come to office hours, I get 5 more people's names and write them down, and I just keep doing that. And then I make a little game for myself when I go to class. As I'm getting started, I just look around the room and start saying the people's names in my head that I have. And I'm also the kind of learner where if I don't use it, I lose it. And so as soon as I have an opportunity to say that person's name again, I'll do it. Even if I'm not sure, I just give it a try and say, is it Julia? And if they say no, then I get to learn again that it wasn't Julia, it's something else. And I try to refresh it. But, usually 4 to 5 times I'm right. And then that name is reinforced for me. So I find that just going through that and being really open with the students saying, I want to learn your names. So I'm going to try my best and I'm going to make some mistakes. So forgive me when I make a mistake, and just tell me your name again and I'll get it eventually. And so usually by the end of the term, most students that have spoken to me, I know their name by then. Now, there will always be a group of students, because there's 250 people in the class basically, that can choose to not speak to me, and therefore I may have never had a chance to learn their name. But any student that has talked to me and who I have had a chance to ask, I'll ask, and I'll do my best to remember. And I find that as soon as students recognize that when they ask a question and I've learned their name, that I'll use it, that those students tend to ask questions more. And so I've noticed over time that it does seem to matter for a number of ways. One is that students will say to me after, wow, I can't believe you know these people's names. And so you can tell they're noticing something's different here, right? So I think their assumption is this person must be mildly invested in what we're doing because they're taking the time to learn some names. And then I've also found that the more times I make an attempt for someone's name, again, like I said, that person will ask more questions and become more involved in the class. So the only unfortunate group that I tend not to be able to reach with this are the ones who choose to never speak to me. And of course, I always feel like that's my loss, because that's my goal, is to actually have a chance to build a relationship with each of them. And I just recognize that at this point, I haven't come up with a technique by which I can always reach out to each of them individually. But as soon as they take even a half step forward, then I have my chance to get to know them, and it's been a really positive dynamic for me in a large class like this. I find people come to office hours a lot more than when I first started teaching, when I didn't have a technique to figure it out on how to start to learn names. And I find more of them will use my name even. I'm really clear that I like being called Susan, and that Dr. Verscheure is not a necessity in the class, and I say Susan when I'm referring to myself in emails and whatnot. And then I find students, again, they take that little half step towards making sure that they've done their part in establishing some sort of relationship for learning, and then I have the chance to do the same. So I've found that to be not really a time-consuming activity, just something that takes a little bit of diligence of pulling out a piece of paper and actually writing down people's names, and has a huge bang for its buck.